Hello BookTube. Today I'm relegating myself. As you can see, the webcam frame is at the bottom of the screen, and that's because I'm ashamed. If you watched my previous videos, you'll recall I have been talking about doing a review of Frantz Fanon's work. I had a Kindle version, as it happens. That was ideal for many reasons, which I'll mention later. I was working long hours, and so I needed to read this book in short snatches. A lot of lunch hours were spent reading it, that kind of thing. So little and often, which meant that I had many opportunities to see the title printed, and yet I was 53% through the book. I was putting together the collage that you see here, which is the cover art from various editions that have been made of Fanon's work, and I realized I've been reading the title the wrong way round. I have been saying white skin, black masks, when the correct way round is black skin, white masks. And so, okay, that got me worried because that was something subconscious, I thought, and I don't trust my subconscious mind. I thought, what are you doing? What are you trying to say? Or, you're messing with the word order. Are you trying to make some kind of counterpoint? You setting yourself up as some kind of opposing side, Well, okay, I imagine from what I've read of Fanon that he might say, well, you are the opposing side. That is, you are the side that doesn't know how it feels to have to wear a white mask. But, in terms of opposition, I couldn't make it up to Fanon's level in any discussion. The man was clearly a genius. I would be out of my depth. So I'm just putting myself down here in this corner because that seemed fitting. So here are the details. This is the Kindle version that I was reading, and the cover art, and the correct title. The Kindle version is 206 pages, which compares closely with the paperback. That's 224. My first question, of course, for nonfiction reviews is, could I summarize this book? Well, I'm sorry, I could not. And I don't think that would be the best thing to do. I think this is a book that needs to be expanded, not summarized. Fanon's knowledge, the scope of his knowledge is so broad, and that was underlined. In 2005, Manchester University Press published a collection of essays that just riff off of all the different concepts, all the different disciplines that Fanon remarks on in Black Skin, White Masks. Fanon's work could easily be the basis for a university course syllabus in critical race theory, and maybe it already is. What I will quote, though, is the hope that Fanon had for his work, because he says here on page 161 of the Kindle edition, "My book is, I hope, a mirror with a progressive infrastructure where the black man can find the path to disalienation." Question 2. What is known about the author? Frantz Fanon was born in Martinique in 1925, and the island was a French colony. So, of course, in the Second World War, he volunteered to come across the Atlantic and fight as part of the French Free Army. He remained in France after his military service, and he studied medicine and psychiatry at the University of Lyon. He must have written some or all of Black Skin, White Masks while he was studying, because Fanon mentions that he considered submitting the manuscript as his thesis. For 3 years, then, from 1953 to 1956, getting my tongue tied there, Fanon lived in Algeria. He was working as the head of psychiatry at the Blie de Joinville Hospital. Now, Algeria, of course, was also a French colony at the time, and this was the period in which there was a struggle for independence. The experiences that Fanon had there, the colonial abuses that he witnessed, they refined some of the thinking that he puts in this book, and he wrote his second work, The Wretched of the Earth. And in view of all the injustices that he saw around him, Fanon also took the decision to join the Algerian Liberation Movement, also known as the FLA, fighting against the French. He became editor of the organization's newspaper, and he was appointed their ambassador to Ghana in 1960. The great tragedy to literature was that Fanon was diagnosed with leukemia, and that took his life in 1961 when he was only 36. Now, we surely would have had many more books in his name had he been given the time. Okay, question 3 is, how is this book structured? Well, Encyclopedia Britannica describes Fanon's book as a multidisciplinary analysis, and I think we better unpack that because it's not very meaningful just as it stands. The book contains 8 essays in which Fanon discusses the concept of blackness and how it manifests itself in the use of language, how it affects relationships between black people, obviously between black and white people, and how the concept of blackness is something that has risen out of the colonial, the European subconscious, but it has also had its influence on the colonized people. I've wondered, as I was reading the book, whether some parts of Black Skin, White Masks began their life as personal journal. There are passages where Fanon, he's just writing in a more intimate, casual, vernacular style. It's very easy to understand, very easy to follow. And he's recording more of his personal experiences of racism, his own internal struggle with being black, well-educated, and trying to be accepted as a person while he's living in France. Then there are these other sections, let's say most of chapters 2, 3, and 4, where Fanon changes his style. He becomes more of a literary and a social critic, and so the register of his language, if you understand that term, changes to become more academic. He starts examining in detail the work of various black writers and also white writers who are talking about colonialism. And in these sections, it gets a little trickier to follow what is being said, and yet even in places here, he interjects sections that feel more conversational in tone. It's almost like he's writing a booktube review, like he's talking to someone, who's he expects to be viewing him on camera. I'll give you an example. The passage that I'm going to read here is Fanon. He's wrapping up his criticism of another writer from Martinique, Mayotte Capicia, a black woman who describes her relationship with a visiting French officer. Now, bear in mind that officer later abandoned her and the child that he fathered. So I'm quoting from page 34 of the Kindle edition. Fanon says, "Before we finish with the woman whose white lord is as good as dead, who surrounds herself with the dead, in a book where lamentable dead things are moping about, we would like to ask Africa to send us a messenger, and we don't have to wait long. Here is Abdoulaye Sadji, whose Nini gives us a description of how blacks can behave in contact with Europeans." So you can see that's a more intimate journalistic style and that literary criticism. But you see that's still not it. There's a third aspect to the book as well, and this is becomes the most challenging for the reader because this showcases Fanon's speciality in psychiatry and also a lot of reasoning in philosophy. The vocabulary you'll find here is very esoteric to those disciplines. Okay, so you gotta prepare yourself for that. This kind of analysis appears throughout the book in small sections, but in particular, this is the style in chapters 1, 6, 7, and 8. Right? What Fanon has done that I have not encountered in a single book by a single author before is kind of to present us with the fullness of his mind, everything from his everyday thoughts and emotions, with his reactions to his own personal reading, plus the concepts that he's acquiring from the study that he made of 4 years of psychiatry and philosophy, and of course his practice in Algeria. So he's taking out all that work and he's trying to bring together within one book a coherent approach to race that can help himself and help others. Next question. Why did I choose to read this book? Well, I think I mentioned in the first coffee break video that I was struggling to remember why this book. I mean, I have a lot of works that I bought in conjunction with the Black Lives Matter movement. I felt I needed to really educate myself. And so I thought, okay, it could be part of that. But it came out of time sequence. So I went back into my Amazon history and I thought, okay, what was I looking at? What date was it I bought it? Okay, what was I studying at the time? And I figured it out. 1 year ago was when I bought the copy. And at the time I was reading for my university course, Season of Migration to the North by Tayyib Saleh. And because that was a set book that I had to write an essay on. Now, the course textbook mentioned Fanon in the chapter which discussed Saleh's novel. And I also had saved this YouTube video. So I must have also watched this video in conjunction. And I think it was this video here, which is it's a Stanford professor of English, Quayson, disgusting Saleh, but of course he mentions Fanon's black skin, white masks, and I think I must have taken down the title or ordered it right there. I mean, I do that. I'll watch a YouTube video, and if I think that book seems kind of groundbreaking or important in some way, then I'll just go and buy it while the video's running. I'm terrible like that. So I'm going to say that's my best theory. That last year I must have been watching Professor Quayson's video and thought, okay, this is going to augment my Open University course and my understanding of season of migration to the north. It's become more than that, though. I feel like, I can't remember the YouTuber that said this is kind of a foundational book, and it certainly feels like a good place for me to start my reading, and then build on it. So how did I get this book, and how much did it cost? Well, you've heard me saying Kindle, 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 Kindle. So right, I bought the Kindle version for £5.49 sterling, or that's US dollars, £8.48. Now I'm going to recommend the ebook version. I don't have any personal thing about ebooks versus paper books. I love the feeling of paper books, but you know, sometimes portability and ease of use is an issue. But in this case, with this book, what's more needed is, you know, Fanon's language and his expertise is so great. I mean, unless you have the same degrees he does and you've done the breadth of reading that he has in French, bear in mind, you're going to need to define terms, and you're going to need to look up names. So the wonderful thing about the Kindle was that you could do that right there, even with my mobile phone, which is how I read most of it. I was able to just look up terms and you know, sort of try to digest what he was saying by getting better definitions of some of the terms for me, and getting some of the names. And so I'm recommending that, because I just think this book needs to be studied. The notes section also that you have on a Kindle is really helpful, because sometimes I wanted to take notes or mark certain passages to come back to later. And okay, I know you can do that in a paper book, but you can't search for them. And I you know, sometimes his text is so dense, I can't emphasize enough. You will get lost in it, even though it's only, you know, just over 200 pages. There's a lot going on in those 200 pages. So I'm going to say Kindle's my preference. You know, I'm putting it out there. Okay, next question. Have I encountered anything unexpected stroke interesting? Well, many, many, many things are interesting about this book, but you know, we need to keep to a reasonable time. This is probably going to be a longer video than average, so I'm just going to choose a couple. Right, here's a couple of highlights of the things that I found interesting. The first one is in chapter 7, where Fanon successfully argues that Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious it's incorrect, that it's not an inherent psychic phenomenon, but it's a cultural acquisition. And Fanon explains what he means by citing how often that black people, influenced by European culture, they assimilate the archetype of black. You know, in European culture we associate colors with certain qualities, and we associate white with light and goodness, and black with evil and darkness. And unfortunately, those archetypes become assimilated by black people, and that this is harmful, because you therefore get this strange thing where you're having to be opposed to yourself, and the only way you can kind of get around that is to try to create the white mask effect, that is sort of think that you are going to be white, and therefore more desirable. Fanon demonstrates that it's just illogical for an inherited psychic archetype to exist that is opposed to the individual. But that's what happens when you have an archetype of blackness as evil. It effectively says, and if you also are black, and of course you'll be called black, then you automatically have this internal conflict, which he believes is a setup for neuroses and mental illness. And I felt that was a really important point to make. In the second thing was in chapter 2. Fanon uses the term negrophobe, and he'll use that again and again, and he's describing the nature of modern prejudice with it. And so he points out that it's rarer now, and by now I mean he was talking in the 1950s, but I think it's probably somewhat true now, that he felt it was rarer for racism to be driven by hatred. And his words are best, so let me just quote him. Okay, so this is page 35 from the Kindle edition. Fanon says, hatred is not a given. It is a struggle to acquire hatred, which has to be dragged into being, clashing with acknowledged guilt complexes. Hatred cries out to exist, and he who hates must prove his hatred through action and the appropriate behavior. In a sense, he has to embody hatred. And he says this is why Americans have replaced lynching by discrimination. Now, I think this point is crucial. I'm going to say this because obviously throughout the book, if you read it as a white person, you're evaluating your own attitudes all the time. You're trying to think, okay, if you react to something in the book, you think, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Are you resisting? Are you resisting? But I did think, that it's often easy for us as white people to look at ourselves and go, well, I'm not hating anybody. And then you can be mistaken for considering, well, that's my work done, good for me. And, I spring cleaned my mind and I haven't found any hatred. So yay, no racism, right? But if I consider fear, fear is a more passive emotion. And the other thing about fear is that one fear can hide itself behind a whole lot of other sort of related fears. And in that way, a person can fool themselves sometimes. That is to say, I can say that my fear has nothing to do with race, because I'm looking at one of the surrounding fears, But if I took time to unpack all those related fears and get back to the central one, then I might have to admit that, my fear is more than I'm really admitting to myself consciously. So I was grateful for that statement of Fanon's, because now I know that it's really more useful if I'm examining my attitudes to race and, are they okay? Do I need to make some adjustments? That, maybe it's not such a helpful thing for me to go looking for hatred and anger, because if that's not there, I can't consider the job done. It might be better for me to take a really close look at my fears and anxieties, a really close look to see, what's really behind that. That might be where I need to reevaluate and make some changes. Next question. Is there anything that readers should be prepared for if they decide to read this book? Okay, obviously I've said it already, but I'll say it again. Do not expect an easy read. But at the same time, do not lose confidence in your ability to gain insights from the text, just because parts of it are challenging. I found it helpful if I had just finished a few pages, and they'd been weighty ones, right? They'd been the ones where Fanon weighed in with all his psychiatric expertise. Sometimes I would just give it a day and then go back and reread those pages. It's a very good technique also if you're tempted to DNF any book. DNF seems to be an interesting issue, and I will probably do a coffee break on that, because I think it might be good, just in the way I talked about examining fears, it might be good to examine DNFs and just be sure that that you understand that maybe the real aversion behind them, and maybe some adjustment to expectations or technique could make all the difference in how successfully you can get through a particular book. And then I've asked myself, is there anything else that's interesting to know about black skin, white masks? Well, okay, I'd like to recommend 2 YouTube videos which talk about the book, and they comment on chapters 2 and 3, where Fanon discusses interracial relationships. So I'm going to put 2 cards up. They'll appear in succession at the top of the screen for Onyx Isis and the Black Curriculum 3071. I'd also love, of course, to recommend that book I mentioned, the Manchester University Press book with all those lovely essays. Yeah, except the book is overpriced, just the way all academic titles are. See, that might be the subject of another coffee break video. But however you do it, by books or by YouTube, following up on Fanon is necessary too, because Black Skin, White Masks, to me it seems like a series of starting points for discussion, like rather than the final word. It's the place where maybe you start and then you branch out and begin to listen to other black voices, whether they comment directly on Fanon or not, to sort of expand your knowledge of the subject. Okay, we're on question 8. We're here. Oh my God. I mean, it seems like this is going to be such an extra long video. I hope nobody minds. It needed it. So any ideas for related or follow-up reading? That's the next question. Well, we could be here for hours talking about that alone. Okay. I've just remembered the booktuber. I'll put her up in the corner here. It's the Francophile reader 8943. She was the one that called Black Skin, White Masks a starting point, like an entry-level book for the study of race and racism. And now that we've gone ahead and we've entered that world of books, well, it's a whole world. I did mention that I've got a Black Lives Matter TBR list. It's been waiting for my attention, and of course I'm getting onto it now. I'm finished the university course. I want to hear some other voices. So what I want to do is to commit to reading and reviewing these fairly regularly. I'm going to switch up now. I'm going to pick a work of fiction to do next, and my eye has been spotting the same title. Whenever I look at my messy bookshelves, I keep seeing this book over and over again that I think I bought in 2021. So I'm taking that as a sign. I need to read this book. So the next novel that I will be starting to read, I've got one that I'm reading now that is going to be reviewed next. That's by Gore Vidal. But after that, the next book will be the 2021 paperback edition of Erasure by Percival Everett. So look out for that. Okay, I can sum up. We made it, right? I always knew it would be a long review, as I said. But let's look ahead. My next video will probably be a coffee break, because I think you need something short. And because I need just a little bit more time to finish the novel I'm currently reading and prepare another review. Please click like if you enjoyed this content. Click subscribe if you want to know when I'm bringing out more. It's been really great spending time with you again, and I look forward to seeing you at the next review. Bye-bye.